I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to talk for a couple of minutes about what I think is our current situation in Canada, that we are at a crossroads, and I think we need to rethink growth in a fragmented world. Canada, I believe, is standing on the edge of an inflection point. As Parliament prepares for yet another budget showdown, the country's economy is being pulled in multiple directions. It's squeezed by high mortgage costs, it's battered by global trade wars, and it's weighed down by years of policy drift. Over the last month or so, I, on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, have spoken with many of Canada's top thinkers, from Benjamin Ta and Albert Ibawath to Heather Exner-Perot, Jim Stanford, Rick Anderson, and Paul Samantan. In recent weeks, that conversation has expanded to include Carl Gomez, Jeff Rubin, JDM Stewart, Pierre-Jean Esmaillet-Follier, and Sam Sarajan, as well as Sergio Marchi recently. Voices that together offer, I believe, a wide range angle for me and you of Canada's place in a turbulent world. Taken as a whole, I believe their message is clear. Canada's problem isn't ideology, it's inertia. Inertia. Number one, the limits of monetary medicine. Carl Gomez, who is the chief economist at CoStar Capital, he said that he believes that the Bank of Canada has reached the end of its influence. After rising rates to 5% to combat post-pandemic inflation, the bank has since eased back to 2.25%. Close to neutral, he says, but further cuts won't save the economy that's lost its growth engine. Interest rates can't fix a trade war, Gomez told me. They can't fix housing supply, productivity, or a lack of innovation. Those require structural changes from governments, not central banks. He warns that 60% of Canadian mortgages will reset within the next 18 months, adding roughly $1,000 a month to household payments. While most homeowners will hang on, the stress will ripple through consumption and confidence. Retail sales have been surprisingly strong, he noted, but it's not sustainable when debt servicing is eating into every paycheck. For Gomez, the housing correction is both necessary and dangerous. Prices have softened, but construction is stalling. The cure for high prices is lower prices. But only if we keep building, he said. That means streamlining approvals, cutting development fees, and focusing on family-oriented housing rather than investor-driven condos. Number two, the global chessboard. If Gomez diagnoses the domestic imbalances, Jeff Rubin maps the geopolitical fault line shaping it. In his new book, A Map of the New Normal, Jeff Rubin argued that Canada's dependence on the United States has become a structural vulnerability. The U.S. isn't the champion of free trade anymore, he told me. It's the architect of a new protectionist order, and we're still behaving like its junior partner. Jeff Rubin believes that Canada's next wave of growth must come from trade diversification, not with the slow growth economies of Europe, but with the expanding BRIC bloc. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and new entrants like Saudi Arabia and Indonesia. The future markets, he says, are BRICS. They're young, industrializing, and growing fast, but Canada's diplomatic ties are weakest, where the opportunities are the strongest. He also questions Canada's reflex to mirror U.S. tariff policy, particularly the 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles when our only EV plant in Ingersoll sits idle. We've become America's echo, Rubin said. We need to rediscover our own economic voice. Looking ahead to next year's USMCA review, he warns the agreement is a dead man walking. If Donald Trump returns to power, Canada could face bilateral negotiations on U.S. terms. If that happens, Rubin cautioned, our lack of diversification will be exposed overnight. 3, a leadership deficit. Historian and author J.D.M. Stewart, whose book, The Prime Ministers of Canada, Canada's Leaders and the Nation They Shape, traces the evolution of leadership from John A. Macdonald to Mulroney. And he told me that Canada's crisis is as much moral as it is economic. Great prime ministers understand how to unite a diverse country, he said. They practiced pragmatism, relied on teamwork, showed courage, and inspired with a vision. Stewart argued that contemporary leaders, Mark Carney among them, must learn from that history: courage to make unpopular choices, pragmatism to balance competing interests, teamwork to empower competent ministers, and inspiration to give Canadians a reason to believe again. He reminded us all that Laurier's optimism that the 20th century shall belong to the century of Canada isn't just rhetoric. It wasn't just rhetoric. It was a blueprint for national confidence. Canada needs leaders, Stewart said, who can once again make us feel that our best days are ahead. 4, lessons from France's welfare state. To understand what happens when governments delay reform for too long, I turned to Pierre-Jean Esmu-Fournier, a French investment banker and cancer survivor who's seen both the generosity and the limits of France's welfare state up close. France, he explained, collects 64% of GDP in taxes and spends lavishly on healthcare, pensions, and subsidies. But the model is buckling under demographic pressure. My treatment cost 320,000 euros a year, Pierre said, and he paid nothing. It's humane, but it's unsustainable. France's debt now exceeds 3.6 trillion euros. Its deficit is 6% of GDP, 3 times what Canada's is, and political instability is rampant. 5 prime ministers in under 4 years, with 20% of ministers under investigations. Pierre-Jean proposes a national referendum to reset expectations, to reduce entitlements, to raise the retirement age, and rebuild trust through transparency. His warning for Canada is very sobering. When citizens believe the state will do everything, they eventually find that the state can do nothing. His takeaway is clear. Canada must balance compassion with accountability before debt forces reform upon us. 5, fiscal discipline and the politics of courage. Sam Savrashan, a behavioral scientist, former finance executive, and author of The Courage to Decide, uttered a complimentary view. Our fiscal problem is really a behavioral one. We forgot, he told us, that every generation repeats the same cycle. Overspend, then rediscover discipline the hard way. Sam argues that Canadians deserve an honest conversation about the trade-offs in public finance, what we want and what we can afford and who pays. He supports separating operational from capital spending the way businesses do, so governments stop borrowing for everyday costs. And he isn't unafraid of unpopular ideas, modestly raising the GST to restore fiscal balance or gradually increasing the retirement age as life expectancy rises. Leadership isn't about pleasing voters, Sam said. It's about telling them the truth and trusting that they can handle it. 6, a system stuck in neutral. Both economists echo what earlier guests have described as a system that talks about growth but structures itself against it. Benjamin Tell from CIBC has long argued that Canada's fiscal architecture is broken. The federal government has all the money, the provinces have all the power, and the cities have all the problems. He believes that empowering municipalities with stable infrastructure funding is essential for productivity. Aled Ed Iberwath of CMHC warns that the housing shortage is a slow-motion crisis. Mortgage delinquencies are rising, but the bigger risk is underbuilding during downturns. When demand rebounds, he told me, supply just won't be there. Heather Exner-Perot of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and author of Constraining Canada says environmental idealism has hardened into paralysis. You can't meet our climate goals if you can't build anything, she argues, calling for reform of the Impact Assessment Act and faster approval of energy and mineral projects. Jim Stanford, formerly of the Canadian Auto Workers, believes that Canada must rediscover its industrial policy muscles. If everyone's a buyer, he said, who's the seller? He supports tying market access to domestic production, as we did in the old Auto Pact. Paul Smemeton, head of the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis, coined a term that captures it all. Ponzonomics, a growth model dependent on debt, immigration, and housing inflation, rather than true productivity gains. And Rick Anderson, a veteran strategist and political advisor, told me that Ottawa is caught in a political game of chicken, with parties poised to trigger an election instead of tackling structural reform. His warning was blunt. Each political cycle without courage deepens the country's malaise. We are running out of time to act. The pattern is clear. We're addicted to expansion without transformation, a treadmill economy where population growth props up GDP, but not prosperity. So I think we have a leadership and public service that's in crisis. That leadership deficit is precisely what the Honorable Sergio Marchi, a former cabinet minister, ambassador, and author of Pursuing a Public Life, spoke to me about and believes that we must confront head on. Drawing on decades in Canadian politics and diplomacy, Sergio argued that the country's democratic health depends not only on better policies, but on better people choosing to serve. Public life, he told us, isn't broken, it's simply short of good participants. He worries that too many talented young Canadians are walking away from politics altogether, turned off by toxicity and cynicism. Yet, like the best public servants, he does still remain hopeful. His book, part memoir, part manual, offers 78 lessons on how to lead, listen, and govern with decency. He calls for a renewal of civic education, mentorship, and diversity in a political recruitment so Parliament can once again reflect the face and values of modern Canada, which he doesn't believe it does today. Sergio Marchi's message complements the Economist warnings that reforming our institutions won't matter unless we also reform our culture of leadership. As he puts it, if you care about our country, you have to step up, not stand back. What Canada needs now, I believe, is a coherent growth strategy rooted in productivity, diversification, and courage. That means, number one, cutting regulatory duplication to unleash investment in housing and infrastructure, particularly energy. Number two, redefining industrial policy to reward companies that produce in Canada. Number three, investing in AI, advanced manufacturing, and digital innovation. Number four, building trade ties with emerging economies rather than only courting stagnant ones in Europe. And number five, giving cities the fiscal tools to lead where senior governments stall. The last generation of Canadian prosperity was built on stability, openness, and steady institutions. But the world has changed. The next will require speed, adaptability, and self-reliance. Canada's challenge isn't that we lack ideas. We lack execution. We know what must be done. Empower cities, reform regulations, diversify trade, and reward productivity. Yet we hesitate, preferring short-term politics to long-term policy. If we continue on this path, the risk isn't collapse. It's irrelevance. Irrelevance. Canada needs to take action. We need to take action. That's Brian Crombie for the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for listening.